be relevant to. I'll look into a case study on 2 different startups that we've backed in the biotech space or life science space, as well as in the AI kind of robotic space. And then I'll do a kind of Q&A at the end. And maybe if we don't just want to hear my voice, other people can also come out and ask their questions with the mic. So yeah, thank you all for attending today. So a little bit of context on the Berkeley Skydeck Fund, which is where I work. We are the partner investment firm of the Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator. So far, we've invested in around 110 companies in the last 2 years, mostly at that kind of very early pre-seed or seed stage. Kind of companies come to us, maybe they've raised no money, or maybe they've raised up to around $1 million. It's kind of that stage there. Our fund is backed by funds like Sequoia Capital, Sierra Ventures, Canvas Ventures, some corporations and high net worth individuals. I am not a UC employee, but we partner with the UC system, and we share half of the general partner carried interest back with the university. So it's a very interesting partnership between the public University of Berkeley and private fund managers. And there's a great kind of profit sharing agreement that really aligns our incentives. We look for startups out of the 10 UC campuses. So that could be an alumni, a professor, a grad student, a researcher, occasionally a student dropout team. But we also look for global startups that we think are building interesting technology abroad, that want to relocate and co-locate in Silicon Valley. And we kind of help use the Berkeley network and use the Berkeley platform as a way to help these startups succeed. And then we are a generalist. I mean, we've invested in ed tech companies, gene editing companies, satellite companies, but we tend to have a little bit of a focus in things that are kind of deep technology, tech transferred startups, specifically in the life science, biotech, semiconductor, computer infrastructure, AI, chemistry, things you think that a university might be a little bit better at than just industry at large. That's where I think our fund can especially succeed. Companies come to us, and I think this is kind of the general, if we are very broad, but every company is kind of coming to us looking to raise about $2 to $5 million of venture funding at the end of the program. So looking to invest, looking to raise this money in about 6 to 9 months from when they start the program and when we invest. We invest $100K on day one, help them kind of figure out some key parts of the business, make this company investable, and then we connect them to the large network of VCs in order to raise that follow-on capital. So if there's any kind of startups in your network that you think are looking to raise $2 to $5 million, shameless plug, our next applications are open on July 8th, and we'll always try to look for more great founders to work with. And as I mentioned, we share our profit with UC Berkeley. Now, the Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator, this is the campus-led program. It was founded 8 years ago by the Dean of the Engineering School, the Dean of the Business School, and the Vice Chancellor of Research. So they run the 6-month-long program that's designed to kind of help companies access the right advisors, find the new customers, and identify the right strategy. Myself, I was a founder in this program, gosh, time keeps flying, 5 years ago, and have really been able to see the growth and development of this program as a founder and now as an investor, working with the program. What Skydeck does that's so special is we really realize that, that there are amazing, great universities all around the world. There are going to be great founders coming out of, all the 10 UC campuses, all the global universities, even, just out of accelerators all around the world. But Silicon Valley still remains a very great place to raise capital as well as find enterprise and B2B customers. And Berkeley, just being this massive public university, in Silicon Valley, has a very large network of alumni. And these alumni are often willing to go back and take calls with our companies, provide advice for our companies, and our companies can use this to get that early market validation they need. And we have about 250 advisors pulled from industry, startups, academia, who really help our companies get more hands-on, everyone from the co-founders of Tesla and Kabam, to various professors in life science and EECS department and business school. to just kind of general startup operators and ex-executives. We do have 2 specialized tracks as well. We have a specific focus. We are generalists, but we have some specific resources available for chip and semiconductor companies, and allowing them to get access to fab space and the kind of right advice and research they need. And we do have a specific focus on life science and bio companies. About 20% or so of our portfolio is in that space. And we have some special resources and communities for companies that look like that. And then, the accelerator also has about connections through 150 seed firms and about 800 investors who join our demo day. So we really try to do is just, what's the power of Silicon Valley? And let's try to use Berkeley to help the startups succeed. So that's us. Looking at, when I thought about giving this presentation, I kind of was going through the basics, and I think one of the major, questions I thought about in this was a question that every entrepreneur should ask themselves, which is, should I raise venture? All universities are pumping out very interesting IP that can transform industries, but also maybe can make smaller changes. And I would say only a small portion of the IP that universities are pumping out really have the opportunity to. I think a lot of them can raise a little bit of money, but actually have the opportunity to maybe be kind of a venture scalable business. I think the question to ask, and I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs about this. They come to me and they say, "Hey, Brian, I'm going to make this prototype. We're going to patent this. It's going to minorly transform this one production process in textiles or in oil and gas. And we think we can, license this or sell this tech for $20 million. It's going to be great. Give me $100,000 to make this work." And while I think there are, great ways to make money off, a company exiting for $20 million, that sort of story just isn't the venture scalable story. And the reason to think about that is just VCs are wrong a lot. They don't like to maybe necessarily tell you that, but that's kind of the game, right? We invest very early in startups, knowing that half, 75%, 90% of the companies, probably will not end up making a large economic impact. But what we're really looking is for the kind of the margins, right? Those 1, those 3, those 5 companies in a portfolio end up driving the vast majority of the returns. And what that means is that every company needs to have a chance of being $1 billion company, or if not larger. Because there's also kind of dilution as funding stage goes up. And so that's something I think people should really ask themselves. I've definitely seen IP come out where, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, where it's kind of a feature and not a product. It can make a minor improvement on a current system, but it might not necessarily be able to capture that sort of venture revenue. It might not have the right business model to really scale to that $100 million of revenue and such. So, that's what's kind of the first question I want to ask myself. So what does a venture scalable business look like? And, I don't want to put categorize things in too much, but really it's I see it as the ability to grow in a capital efficient manner, either with, low upfront costs or very unique economics where, probably the payback period from acquiring a new customer is 12 months or less, where that money comes in and then, because you're going to have to raise money to do customer acquisition, and hopefully that money is flowing back in an efficient enough time period where there's some capital efficiency there. And additionally, there needs to be, high margins, right? I can't be making $1 billion of revenue and only $10 million in profit, right? Or $30 million in profit. That sort of business is just not going to, I guess, in margin, to be kind of a exciting for venture. Next, kind of the total addressable market. I talked about this a little bit, but the total addressable market should be over $1 billion. And there's kind of a couple ways to think about this. And this is something I always talk to entrepreneurs about. We can think about a bottom up or a top down approach. The bottom up approach, is somewhat simple. There are 300 million people in America. They're going to buy 3 toothbrush 4 toothbrushes a year. I hope that's the right number. Each toothbrush, let's say, is $5, right? So 300 million times 4 is 1.2 billion times 5, would be $6 billion. And so that's kind of a bottoms up analysis. The toothbrush market, we could say, is $6 billion. And there's also, and that's going to work. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs use that when they're looking at a new industry, when maybe their technology is so frontier that there's not necessarily a easy comparable market to look into. I will say, I think VCs tend to prefer a top-down approach where there is a defined market, and this startup can say, because of my unique technology, my unique business model, because of the innovation my startup is creating, I'm able to capture a piece of this very defined market. So we could take Airbnb, for example. There was a very defined market of what are people paying for travel accommodations? And Airbnb could go in there and say, our new innovation can create a new experience. It can kind of change some of the pricing dynamics to the point where we can capture 5%, 10%, 15% of this market. And that sort of top-down approach, I think, is just a little more interesting to VCs. But both approaches can work and generally speaking are used. And finally, we can think about a defensible market. Which means as this company scales, it's going to be very difficult for competitors to show up and eat their cake. I think I see a lot of great ideas where the company, I'm like, yeah, you could, grow this business. You could be doing $3 million, $5 million, $20 million in revenue. And then one of your competitors is going to see, and because you can't keep out this competition, someone's going to eat your cake. So I think that's kind of the last key feature of a venture scalable business. And this can occur through a couple of means. Patents, which aren't super relevant for software, but are relevant for materials and life science, and some hardware can keep out competition. Highly proprietary technology. So some technology is just very difficult to build, to do. And so even if you can't patent this software, it is challenging. And so that can be a convincing reason for an investor to look at. There are network effects. You can think about a marketplace where there are buyers and sellers. You can think about a social network like Facebook, where you just have such a critical mass that it's very difficult for someone to show up and to take the cake, so to speak. There are definitely some interesting things around data. What we've seen is a lot of AI companies will say, I'm going to have the best data, therefore I'm going to have the best product. And I think for last probably 5 to 8 years, that was a very convincing answer to a lot of investors on defensibility. They're kind of saying, I have this data moat. But I think now we are seeing a trend where and Andreessen Horowitz just released a pretty interesting article in regards to this, probably, I want to say 2 months ago, because it was before quarantine, that kind of just talked about how, yes, there is a data moat, but that's really kind of a short-term advantage because you can always figure out new ways to buy data and get data. And really, you should be looking at some of these other defensibility characteristics. So you can imagine, for example, if you are the first person to get an autonomous vehicle out there, you're also going to have a lot of the best training data you would need to then have the safest autonomous vehicle. Just as an example. And we have a company called DeepScribe. They're doing medical transcript summarization for doctors. And as time goes on, they're going to get more data. They're going to solve the edge cases, and they're going to have the best product, which will make it hard for someone to show up. And then finally, there's kind of integration and stickiness. And while I think this does mean, what I mean by this is just that it's going to be kind of hard to remove this piece of technology from the stack. Right. If you're developing infrastructure technology, it's very and over a course of 3 or 4 years, your customers are building on this infrastructure. It's just going to be very difficult to get rid of you because there's so many moving parts. There's so much risk in that, and so it's going to be hard for a competitor to steal your customer away. For example, here we can think about Salesforce. People get on Salesforce. We use Salesforce at the Berkeley Skydeck Fund. And we have put our data on there. We start building integrations with Zapier, with MailChimp, with all these different other features. And all of a sudden, it's so hard to just replace us for a competitor that's maybe truly a 20% of the cost. And so I think that's also another good defensible reason. However, I would say, that does mean someone could still copy your product at some point, and then you're kind of just going, who can capture the most market share, right? There are competitor CRMs. It's very hard to transition off Salesforce, but if there's somebody else who doesn't have Salesforce yet, and there's opportunity for some of the other CRMs to go after the market there. So now looking a little bit like kind of the typical path for a university tech spin out. I think some of this is a little self-explanatory, but wanted to make sure we are covering the basics, and we do have some case studies here with some quotes from entrepreneurs later. The IP is generally created in a university operator, university-owned lab. This will trigger rights that the university then has over this IP. The technology gets some initial validation. The people in the lab probably they're probably doing this, understood some of the commercial implications, but they kind of have a further understanding of how this might be relevant to industry. The third step is one or more of these people get pretty excited about this, and they say, wow, we should make a startup out of this. Usually I think we see this as a professor and then a postdoc or grad student who are going to end up going very full-time on this, and whether the professor might take sabbatical for a year or a semester and go full-time, or the professor might remain kind of a part-time founder while the postdoc and the grad student want to spin this out. And then the members are working with the tech transfer office to define ownership and really kind of figure out what the royalties are going to look like, what that license look like, and such. And then thinking more about this, I thought there were some challenges we've seen. Just having invested in companies that have spun out technology out of Berkeley, out of other universities. There's just certain things we see at that, really that first check stage where I think sometimes say, man, or I wish this was a little bit different, or this could just be a little more optimized. And some of that's just due to kind of, information asymmetry and such. I kind of want to share some information there. Let me just check my timing. Good. We'll have a lot of time for questions. So the first challenge that we see, it can be in this tech transfer aspect of things. I will say for any of the UC folks here, I think the UC system really is a leader in tech transfer policies. And so I think if you are a founder from one of the UC systems listening in, you are very lucky to be a part of institutions that really think entrepreneurship is important, and I think have, generally speaking, from what I've seen, founder-friendly and startup-friendly and venture-friendly terms. I took a trip out to the UK a year ago, and I definitely heard some horror stories around IP from some universities, and then I also met some great people who in the UK who are trying to completely transform the way tech transfer was looking there at the various universities. So but with that being said, you really want to make sure you have the right ownership and license agreement to make the business attractive for VC. And I think I'll talk about that in a second there, but that's just making sure the university doesn't own too much of it. Because that's going to make it unappealing for VCs, because they're going to get worried that the founders will just bail on the Series A or the Series B because the ownership stake is so low. And if you think about what the history of tech transfer could look like, it really makes sense that some universities are looking to acquire these large stakes, right? Because 20, 30, 40 years ago, and even today, there are still a lot of great pieces of technology that aren't going to become billion-dollar exits, that are really just going to become a $1 million, $500,000, $3 million license. And in those instances, or even $10 or $20 million license, and in those instances, the universities want to get a decent take back from the IP that they helped create. And so I think it's just kind of that shifting model to then understanding, well, okay, that's going to be great for certain types of technology, but for other larger types of technology, or not larger types of technology, but technology that can necessarily be venture scalable, the economics are going to work. Even if you only have a 3, a 5, a 7% stake in this business with some royalties, and because if this company does do $100 million in revenue, or if this company is worth a couple $1 billion, it's going to be much better than having a 50% stake in a $3 million license. So that's kind of one thing to be aware of. I know there's a lot of information asymmetry in this market. People often don't, know these best practices. And so we always try to advise our entrepreneurs. We always try to connect them to other entrepreneurs who've gone through this process. At Skydeck, we're generally happy to kind of share some quick thoughts with other tech transfer offices who maybe are thinking about this. And I guess at the Berkeley Skydeck Fund, we're thinking about that. And then we also are thinking about, also happy to share thoughts with entrepreneurs who maybe are thinking about, what is best here in that regards. Kind of the next challenge we talked about, and this is similar, is this cap table. We want to see a clean cap table that we think is going to encourage the founders of the company to stay with this business until a sizable exit. And generally speaking, what that means, and a little flexibility here, but there's at least 2 full-time members of the company who are, and sometimes it's 1, but usually it's at least 2 or more, who are controlling the vast majority of the equity. Probably in the lines of, if they haven't raised any venture money yet, probably in the lines of 70 or 80%, maybe with some part-time folks, as well as the university potentially owning that other, 10 to 30%, depending on how that would look. That's kind of what we're looking for on the cap table. We want to know that there's enough equity to, let more employees come on board as well. We know there's going to be dilution from continued venture rounds. So that's kind of what we're looking like too. And usually it's also at least 1 technical co-founder being on this list as well. The next challenge we're seeing, and this is probably one of the more common ones, and I don't think it's just unique to tech spin-outs out of universities, but kind of I call it the chicken and eggs. I need data to fundraise. I need to fundraise to get data. I need to fundraise to hire a team. I need a team to fundraise, right? Kind of this classic back and forth that I think a lot of entrepreneurs are going through. And I don't think I should dive into how to solve this for non-university startups, but I think for university startups, generally speaking, at the point where you want to spin out the IP, ideally there's enough data to at least, raise enough money to get you to that next round of data. And so you kind of just have to use what you've done out of the university lab and use your own team and experience and your PhDs, you are experts in the field, you are postdocs, you are professors. And so being able to, kind of just find that right investor who thinks that you do have enough validation, you have that there's been enough right here to de-risk the business at this valuation so that you can raise that next amount of capital. It's a challenge. It's always going to be for entrepreneurs. I'm not sure it stops becoming a challenge as companies scale, right? VC is all about risk. And so at the early stage, you need a little bit of data and a little bit of market validation and a decent team to get this. But even at the Series A, Series B, Series C, you still want to feel like you have the right core components of your business to raise. Challenge 4, I think about, and there's definitely more challenges than just the 5 I will present. But I talked about this a little bit earlier, feature versus a product. And this is probably the most common thing I'll see with entrepreneurs who don't understand why they're not raising venture at the time. And this can come down to business model many of the times, and we'll talk about the end. But essentially, maybe here's a startup I remember hearing about as an entrepreneur. They built a new technology that would make drones more silent, right? Pretty cool. Big challenge with drones. Drones are loud. They're kind of annoying when they're on the beach or in the park or whatever it's going to be. And so they go out there and say, look, I made this cool technology, this great invention. Why can't I go out? I want to go raise venture and do this, right? And so they go out and their business model at this time might be, well, I'm going to license this to drone manufacturers. And then drone manufacturers are going to, pay me a royalty on everything they produce. And that's kind of they have this great innovation, and they have this now they're trying to sell a feature to the drone manufacturers. However, if you look at kind of the business model, the venture scalability, You might find, and don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember this being the challenge for this business, was that it would be very hard to command the sort of pricing power and maintain those high margins in this business while hitting venture scalable, while hitting that venture scale, while trying to make, do 200, 300 million, $500 million a year in revenue. That path just didn't really seem to exist, because at some point, some competition will show up to kind of lower those margins, even though there's some of that proprietary technology, right? But you can imagine a venture scalable business model that would kind of take that same technology and still be a product, might say, well, I'm going to release a direct to consumer or direct to enterprise. I'm going to make my own drone. And the reason why this will be the best drone in the market is it's going to be the silent drone, the drone that makes no noise. And, I don't think I can speak right now as to, what necessarily is going to make more money or be more successful, make a better business. But that second story, that has much more venture scale potential. So if you do sometimes feel like you have, this technology as a feature, you want to license it out, occasionally it can be better just, for venture to just make your own product and then to try to release that. That's kind of the narrative that I think venture likes to see. And a caveat to that being that, some of these licenses or there definitely can be certain pieces of technology that are able to hit that where the need is so high for the license that maybe they can't hit venture scale. But that's something you can look at and generally run financial models on. Another piece of advice, another kind of a story on that might be, computational biology. There's a lot of interesting new technology out there right now, kind of trying to use data science in order to understand kind of biophysics principles, how proteins might fold, what drugs might be more successful. And there's kind of two business models with that, right? You can try to sell that to pharmaceutical companies, to startups, which could be a route to make. And I think, some companies have been very successful with that. But we've definitely seen kind of some pushback being like, how many companies will really pay for this? How useful is this competition and such? Or you can say, I had this great drug discovery platform. Now I'm going to make my own drugs. I'm going to come up with the next greatest proteins and drugs to solve some challenges and become, the next Genentech, whatever it's going to be. And so that's kind of that second approach definitely I think would be a more naturally venture scalable approach, but both have some potential in that instance. Oh, I wrote lawnmower example. There's one startup we looked at a while back that was making an autonomous lawnmower. Their kind of special piece of technology was this kind of on the edge computational system that could do object detection, that we thought was interesting. We didn't think there was necessarily potential in licensing this tech out to the point of venture scale. So they were thinking about the more venture scalable business model was to make their own autonomous lawnmower and just sell that directly to consumers or to enterprises. Maybe there's questions. I didn't look yet. There is some Q&A here. Okay, let me do challenge 5, and then I'll dive into questions after that. Sorry for not checking. And finally, I guess the last challenge I would say is market validation. A lot of the folks here, they're coming out of academia. They definitely have some strong industry connections or some industry connections, but they need to get that. You have this cool tech. Maybe a corporation funded it. Maybe it didn't fund this lab. Who knows? But now I need to get a little bit of market validation just to prove to the investor that the market wants this. And that's everything from customers saying they want this to LOIs, to pilots, to revenue. I will say there's also joint ventures. Something to be very wary. Joint ventures are definitely an avenue, but definitely something to be wary of, because that could definitely mess with the cap table and ownership structure. But these companies need to be able to get some market validation to go to an investor and say, look, the oil and gas industry wants this, pharmaceuticals want this, green tech wants this, enterprises want this, whatever it's going to be. So I'm going to now answer a little bit of questions here, and sorry for delaying on that. And we are about, I'll go through the last ones quickly. Maybe a little more than halfway through. I can talk quickly. What percent of our investments have outright licensed patents from Berkeley? I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I would think out of Berkeley specifically, probably around 10 or so, 10 to, I think around 10 have directly, maybe more because we made some of those follow-on rounds. Yeah, 10 to 20 would kind of be my initial estimate. I would just need to look over our portfolio. It's 110 companies. Hard to know off the top of my head each one. We also, a lot of our companies have also spun out tech out of other tech transfer offices. Do the VCs you dive into look at license terms? Yes, they definitely look at license terms. Red flags would be too high of royalties, I would say, could definitely be a red flag at that early stage. Too high of ownership stake in the company could be some red flags there. Maybe just weird rights. Maybe who else has access to this license could be a red flag to this company, right? The university can also license that out. Exclusivity is something to be very aware of. It's probably a whole conversation of its own, and so definitely something that would be good to do. Maybe another talk on. And what do these things VCs think of shadow/phantom equity or equity-like provisions? I think we just look at them like equity, kind of speaking, right? If we see them, or we're seeing them in very similar to equity. Yeah. So I think that's kind of some of the answers there. Understand VCs need to be credited. Is there a mechanism for average folks to invest retirement funds in a startup fund? I'll talk about on the funding route. So I'll get into funding a little bit here. So let me open this back up to present, and I will go a little bit faster. But I guess we're doing some Q&A now, so maybe I'm doing all right. So now funding opportunities and routes, right? So after you maybe have solved some of these challenges, what should you be looking for funding opportunities? So first, there's non-dilutive, and this is probably, some of these are going to be more relevant to our folks here from the U.S. But even outside the U.S., I think a lot of global governments are really doing well right now in funding and providing grants to early stage entrepreneurship. In some ways, maybe even more impressively than the U.S. sometimes, at least in some of the, I think, the changes and the ability to adapt. So first is non-dilutive routes. We look at SBIR, Department of Energy grants, DHS, those nonprofits. There's just a lot of grants out there that are available that are maybe 10K, 25K, 100K, $1 million, $3 million, that are out there right now that can help get companies funded. And I think a lot of our tech spin out entrepreneurs that we've looked at, they almost all got SBIRs. And we've probably invested either right after the SBIR phase one, or kind of right around the same time as the SBIR phase one is kind of where we look at it. There's also some really great kind of public matching systems. So we have a lot of our startups that say, hey, if I raise $400,000, the government's going to give me $3 million, whatever it's going to be. We have one startup that had something along those lines, which was great. I don't think VCs, unfortunately, they should look more at that. I think they should see that as more validation than they do. But that is definitely an interesting route, and it kind of can encourage public and private investment. And there's also corporates. A lot of corporates will offer grants, pilots. I mentioned joint ventures, something to be wary of. So it's kind of another way to get some non-dilutive funding routes. You can also get revenue from corporations. Some of our startups in this cohort, they already have some pilot agreements with corporations for 25K, 50K, 100K, whatever it's going to be. And that's great funding for an early stage startup, because it not only gets the company funded, gets the company more data, it also provides some market validations that VCs love to see. So I definitely think, running pilots with corporates is a really great thing to do as an early stage startup. Then we look at kind of dilutive funding routes. One, I think kind of going back to corporates here, corporates will also invest. There's a ton of corporate accelerators out there right now that can just put 50K into something that's strategically interesting for them. So maybe you still have some questions on the venture scalability, but the corporate, has some strategic interest in this. So I think that's always a good route. There are angels as well. I think it's hard to raise money from angels. But if you know the right people, if you have these relationships, you can collect a bunch of 10K checks. You can try to find people give you 50K, 100K, 500K checks. Generally speaking, it's people who know you, they're mentors, people you found through your network. Venture firms are kind of the next thing to look at, right? They're investing, $500,000, maybe even 100K, but generally speaking, $500,000 to $100 million. They're pretty hands-on. They are found also through your network. That's kind of another funding route. I think a lot of initial tech spinouts are just a little too early to raise some venture, which is why that SBIR funding and those governmental grants can be good. But being able to raise 100K, 50K, a couple 100K can also be possible from some firms and some angels. And finally, there's accelerators like Berkeley Skydeck. Accelerators, generally speaking, provide 250K to 25K to 250K. They're very hands-on. They're really focused on improving certain aspects of the business, if that's market traction or team, access to corporations. They will provide a network, which is great, especially for first or second-time entrepreneurs. I think one of the biggest things our companies say about Skydeck they love is they come in on day one, they have a network of entrepreneurs, of advisors, of VCs they can access through the Skydeck fund, as well as through Berkeley Skydeck. And you can also engage with them cold. That's one of the things I really like about accelerators is they're generally speaking application-based, and most other investors, they're very hard to just do cold outreach to, but accelerators, you can really do cold outreach, and I really appreciate that about accelerators. Always better get a warm intro, don't get me wrong, but accelerators will look at that, and I'll take a quick look at some questions here. Do VC investors need to be accredited? So the VC funds are funds, so they are allowed to invest. They are taking generally funding from other folks who might be individuals. Not sure about retirement funds, and probably don't want to provide financial advice here. Just not being a financial advisor on what to do with people's retirement funds. Crowdfunding, I don't think many VC scalable businesses are getting started through crowdfunding. Mostly those are like, I wouldn't call them features, but kind of non-venture scalable products, right? Look at this new backpack, this new tent, this new coffee mug. And that's kind of what we see a lot for crowdfunding for. I've seen it happen. I've seen companies who maybe in dire straits do it to stay alive. So it's an avenue, but not one we see commonly. Coming from the strategy and business side and not the tech side, where I always have a concept of data, what is your advice? Grad student with no money. Well, at least things are cheap. I will say, the nice part about being a grad student with no money is when you start a startup, you make it work off little bits of money. One of your advantages. I think you'd want to just find that technical co-founder. The most important thing I think you can do to be an entrepreneur is find the right co-founder. Find somebody you want to have great ideas with, you want to work with. Do we take a percent of ownership in all of our companies? So the Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator, they're running the program. The Skydeck Fund is investing 100K, generally speaking, for 5% of all of the companies. Now, usually we do that through a safe at a 2 mil cap to get us the 5% of preferred shares. But it's also so common for our companies to come to us having just closed $500,000 at a 4 mil cap, at a 5 mil cap, at a 6 mil cap. And they're still going through Skydeck, even though we're taking 100K for 5%. And for those companies, what we can do, generally speaking, is we can take a combination of common stock or founder shares plus preferred shares. And a lot of founders who've already raised at a above a 2 mil cap find that to be very nice. So that's kind of what we can do on that. Most people aren't coming through Skydeck for the money. They're coming through really for the access to the platform. The money's nice, access to the VCs of potentially the Skydeck fund. And I think in general, what we tell our startups too is, you're not optimizing for dilution right now. You're optimizing for the dilution, when you eventually were to liquidate or exit. And if Skydeck in our program is able to increase the value of your business enough so that your next round of funding, you're raising at a higher valuation, instead of raising at a 6 mil cap, you're raising at a 10 mil cap or a 12 mil cap or whatever it's going to be. You make up for that dilution in the long term. So what you really should be doing at the early stage is finding the right partners, finding the people who are going to help make your business successful, get you access to customers, get you access to investors, because that's going to improve your long-term, economics. That's going to make the pie bigger. And that's kind of what we're all really focused on at Skydeck. I think probably about a third or so of our companies have raised at above a 4 mil cap before the program or so. And many are also raising right alongside. We have companies where we invest 100K and then 3 weeks later they might raise $1 million at a 5 or 6 mil cap, which happens as well. So kind of going back to the presentation here, and I have 18 minutes. Characteristics of a startup. So I think it's another thing. I think a lot of startups want to go out and raise $1 million or $5 million, but I'll think about what does a startup look like when they want to raise 100K to $500,000. So they have this team and cap table in place. Technical team members are full-time, and just the full-time people control the majority of the equity. The technology is owned and figured out. Like if you want to really start raising, the beginnings of that 100K plus money, that's kind of what you should look like. IP is owned. There's some early experiments, data, prototype that shows that this technology can work, that it is unique. The market size is substantial. There's no clear product competitors in this market. And we think this business can remain defensible. And there's some validation. There's pilots, there's LOIs, there's revenue, there's customers who are ready to pay. I mean, definitely are there people who can go out with a slide deck and raise $2 million? Happens every day, I'm sure. But that's definitely not common in what we see. We're even seeing companies that have, 5K, 10K a month in revenue. They're probably looking to raise several hundred thousand dollars potentially. And so, all this, if you have a great team, that can often, maybe mean your validation can be a little bit less. Everything's a little bit of a gradient at this early stage. Elon Musk can raise a lot of money just off, what he's done in the past. So even if, there's no tech, there's no market, there's no validation, people will probably just give that person money. Some investors are very market focused, but these are kind of the core things I think investors are looking for at this early stage. And I would say probably looking for, all of these to be decent and two of these to be very strong. So that could be, great team, huge market. That could be amazing validation and some pretty cool technology, kind of whatever it's going to be there. So now I'm going to look at some case studies. And I've also collected some quotes from a company. So I'm going to look at Palogenetic first. Palogenetic came through our program 1 year ago. They finished about a year ago. This was a grad student building some interesting gene editing technology, found in Professor John Coates' lab. The grad student, we kind of known for a while at Skydeck. They actually quickly brought on an experienced co-founder, which was great for us to see. That was great validation to see a kind of experienced advisor join on board full-time for this company. That's sort of validation that shows, VCs aren't experts in everything. So when we see somebody who is an expert, join a team full-time, that's also very good validation for us. They had some great technology, but really I think still we're figuring out that best product market fit. They thought they had this business model in this kind of interesting type of yeast that could create very clean bioreactors, but it wasn't really sure how it would do that. It went through Skydeck, and I think during our program, what they really figured out, the tech was still there. I think the team got in slightly better shape because the co-founder already joined on right before Skydeck. But they really, I think, figured out that product market fit and that venture scalable business model. Now they're kind of looking to be more of an operator for a lot of these synthetic biology companies and running the experiments and the culture for them. And they raised $1.5 million after our program and brought on a very experienced CEO. Kind of very excited to see what this company will do. Sorry, I had a duplicate slide there. My bad, folks. I asked Pal some parts of the process here. And I'll look at the questions at the end of these case studies. I said, what was the hardest part of the process for you as a kind of a life science company? They said finding lab space was quite difficult. I think we at Skydeck can help them, but it's very much in demand. And right now in this COVID-19 thing, definitely something we hear from our life science founders. When can we do our experiments again? They mentioned this was, I guess, also probably before they were in Skydeck. This was kind of right as they were spinning that out. Finding the money that can be used on the IP and other admin work, right? A lot of SBIRs, they can be used only on research. So you need to find a little bit more of that capital to buy that IP, to maybe hire a business development person to do admin. I think one of the great reasons why Skydeck has been so complementary to a lot of companies that have just raised an SBIR, they have that 250. They really, to do research, they really just need that extra 100K to run some of the business operations so that in 6 to 9 months they can raise that real money. They had some grant funding, as they said, but can only be used on research. Advice on how to get early stage funding, really mentioned looking at these SBIR resources, and there's a lot of details here at sbir.gov. Definitely something I'd encourage for any tech spin out. What was the hardest part from university research to product market fit? What he recommended to do was to find product market fit as soon as possible. And this is always what we recommend for folks. You don't want to be a hammer finding a nail, because when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You really want to dive into what is the pain point, and then your technology is kind of solve that. So that's something to really dive into. And he's recommending doing this, maybe even before spinning out the technology. Really understand what market this is going to address, who's going to be the buyer. Maybe you need to figure out some of the business model. I think you can do that after you raise a little bit of money, but that's something you should figure out. They really recommend NSF I-Corps. We are a big fan of I-Corps as well. I-Corps. And because they really help companies find product market fit and really go through that kind of experimental process of doing that. Look at the next startup, Ambidextrous Labs. This professor, spelled Ken Goldberg wrong, founded out of Professor Ken Goldberg's lab. Several postdocs, started a robotics company, tackling packing and logistics. The technology was great. There was definitely competition in the market, but it's such a large market that we think that there's going to be a lot of kind of different niches in here. And we thought the technology was quite spectacular. So we saw a very strong technical team, and they were kind of in a venture hot area. I think anything kind of in machine vision and robotics is a little hot right now. So definitely something that I think something to think about as you are spinning out a startup is to maybe talk to some friendly VCs that you meet probably through university, who can kind of let you know about kind of what's more exciting here. We might hear a little bit of a washer in the background. Sorry about that, folks. But they needed to focus on product market fit and go to market. So that's kind of, they came out with some idea of the product market fit, but we're still not really sure. They didn't go through our program. They actually just immediately raised several $1 million from a local VC fund and various investors, and we participated in that round as well. So they kind of they were, I think, in such a venture hot space that they were able to, and the professor was very experienced and very well known in this field. They were able to go out and just kind of raise that several $1 million round right away. And they have, since our investment, really expanded pilots and contracts to get that early validation, hoping to raise some money, in the next 12 months. And I think even at this stage as well, they're still kind of looking at what it means to, find that right customer, get that validation, because the technology is so new that, they can get, I think they can get these great pilots, which can provide revenue, and then turning those into recurring deals, I think is where they're focusing on right now. For Ambidextrous, what was the hardest part of the process? They said transitioning from an academic mindset to a business mindset, definitely something we hear all the time from our founders. Just being in academia, I don't want to say a little slower paced, but there's maybe not that same fire to get things out because you're running out of money and a fixed period of time. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that we've seen is kind of switching to that. I think thinking about business model, about capturing value, are another thing to think about in the mindset change. Going to market, I think, is challenging for some of these, entrepreneurs, especially the more technical ones, because now they're having to go from I've been this great scientist, and now I need to go convince customers to buy my product, so that's been one change. And I think in general, something else we've heard about is maybe some of the grad student professor dynamics, right? You go from, hey, there's a professor, the grad student's a very hierarchical relationship, to now, I'm the CEO, I'm the co-founder. And kind of just thinking about how that might, leadership might change there as well. Something to think about. And I think, getting mentorship from past tech spinouts is probably the best thing to do if you're a tech spinout trying to get advice on that. I think a lot of university accelerators are also very good at being helpful here. Advice on how to get early stage funding, sell the team and the technology vision. I will say that Ambidextrous being in this, very venture hot space, it was easier for them than potentially every team would be, but I definitely think that's something to focus on, right? As PhDs, as postdocs, as professors, they are the experts. You are the experts. VCs, we are not the experts at everything. I think we're good at figuring out product market fit, figuring out competitive dynamics. Figuring out venture scalability, figuring out competitive dynamics, figuring out business model. I think that's what VCs are good at. But entrepreneurs and who are more scientifically focused are really kind of the tech experts. So sell that. And then talk to as many customers going out as possible. Yes. Building really needs to be done later in the process. After you spin that tech out, probably my next piece of advice would be stop coding, stop building the tech, and just start talking to customers. And don't say, do you like this technology? How could this tech work? Maybe you want to ask how this tech could work in your enterprise, but you also really want to ask questions around the problem. How much money are you spending on this problem right now? Who's in charge of this product right now? Where does this pain point fit in your stack right now? Play scientist as much as possible. How far was your university research from a product market fit? They were saying, we believe that our technology is a critical component in the feature of set needed to achieve product market fit, but only provides benefit and context to a larger system with additional components. He's saying, I advise startups to get, working on product market fit as quickly as possible, having these conversations, a little bit of a reiteration from earlier. I think that's, kind of some advice that we've covered on this call so far. I think the closing thoughts I would say on this before I look at some more of the questions would just be, after talking to more of these entrepreneurs and getting their feedback, product market fit is really everything. And I think sometimes one of the challenges I see is there's this kind of sunk cost mentality, meaning I built all of this, then how I don't want to drop something just because the customer tells me I should drop it. But that's, I think, a sunk cost mentality that can really kill a lot of startups. And if you're just kind of spinning out technology that maybe you as a grad student worked on for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever it's going to be, you might find it very challenging to drop 90% of that research and just focus on the 10% that really the customers want, just because you said, oh no, I spent almost my life on this. I don't want to drop it now. The customer needs to have this. But I think really asking questions and not providing answers is key. Playing a scientist, more of a social scientist, I think this time around, or an economist, and don't present the product and get feedback. Everyone's going to say it's great, but asking questions around the problem. I really still believe pilots are your friend. You don't want to get overloaded with them, but run pilots as a way to build customer relationships, to collect more data, to get that early market validation, and to kind of keep building and iterating. And then, I think the other thing to think about just in general entrepreneurship is picking your customers as in revenue. Not all revenue is equal. If you're telling a story like this, you're telling a story in one direction and you have some auxiliary revenue that doesn't necessarily de-risk that major story, it's basically just pointless. It might keep your business alive, but it doesn't mean anything to VCs. So, revenue is data that will de-risk product market fit to an investor. So kind of just as you think about getting traction, it really needs to be in regards to de-risking this product market fit. Some useful resources, my email, brian@skydeck.vc. Everyone's always welcome to email me. I try to be helpful wherever I can. There's some links on Skydeck, our program, our Global Founders Program for global entrepreneurs. And then also one thing that Michael Cohen from Berkeley shared with me a while back, which is Berkeley's tech transfer policies. And I think if you're a university trying to find interesting tech transfer policies, this is available and kind of cool. So maybe I want to screenshot this link. But just something to think about. I have some more Q&A. Sorry, it took a little long. I thought this would be a short call. Is it important for a full-time team member from a technical MBA, from a non-technical background? I don't think you need a full-time team member necessarily at that early stage. It can be helpful. I think you get advice. If you're technical, you just want to get the right advice to do business. I do think at some point business co-founders, or leaders are important to bring on board. They have a skill set. Please discuss the mistake technical founders make when interacting with the business side of the equation. I just don't think as being good necessarily listening and communicating with customers. Kind of going from the scientific background, where you've been in a lab, going to I need to talk, convince, sell. I think that's kind of a mistake we see. I think management as well of teams can be different. I don't think there's any kind of classic mistakes that other entrepreneurs maybe won't not make. I think listening to customers is definitely something to think about there. Any hot market wealth competition, including a status quo? Could you elaborate on good versus bad competition from a VC perspective? That's a very good question. Could I elaborate on that? I think we want to see some healthy competition. I think what we're looking for is differentiation. So, that could be, let's say you're a new startup and you're trying to raise $2 million and there's a startup that has already raised $100 million in this market. You need to be very differentiated from that startup. If there is that kind of market there in order to go after that. Same with if there's already market leaders in that space. However, if you're trying to raise $2 million and there's only other companies that have raised $2 million or raised their seed or Series A, maybe you can be slightly less differentiated because you still have a chance to go to market faster and just have a slightly better solution. So yeah, I mean, I think is it competition you can beat enough to get venture scale? That's the thing to think about, I think, with competition there. Some healthy competition certainly isn't bad. And I do not like it when entrepreneurs tell me there's no competition, because there's always, there's a problem and there's somebody else trying to tackle this problem in some other way or access that revenue. So I had a 3D printing company targeting video games. We would sell collectibles to video game users by partnering with game developers. We had some competition, but also competition would just be other things selling to gamers, other things trying to get gamer at wallet share. Could be some kinds of competition there. In-app purchases maybe be another type of competition. How's the nonprofit funding scene? Do VC get to another nonprofit funding? No, I mean, I love non-dilutive funding. As long as the funding doesn't take up too much at the cap table, I don't think we care too much where it comes from. And some funding can also be very validating on the market as well, right? If you're a biotech startup getting funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that can look very nice as well. Already the hot market, product market fit has many definitions. It does. I don't think my definitions were. I didn't think I was giving definitions. Just more advice on how to find it. But yeah, there are many definitions there. So I think we have 1 minute left, and I got to everything. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining. Please feel free to follow up with me with any questions. Our Skydeck Accelerator applications are going to open on July 8th, and we'd love to get the help getting the word out there when that happens. We really want any entrepreneurs to apply to us. We love to engage entrepreneurs. And yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Brian, for your wonderful talk. Brian, if you want to bring up your contact information slide again, just so people have a chance to take a look at that. And if you need to, you can contact Brian directly. You can always contact us here at UCLA TDG. And again, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a great Friday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.